Hello and welcome to another episode of the Pitt Mailbag Show from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're your Pitt beat writers and hosts, Chris Carter, Stephen, and Thompson, here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. As always, you can find our work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. You can find this show and all of the podcast and video content for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Search Post-Gazette Sports, and you'll get all of the daily content that comes out from all of our writers, including our Tuesday episodes of the Pitt Mailbag Show and all of our post-game shows here on the network. Stephen, Pitt basketball is in a bit of a slump. This is going to be an all Pitt hoop show with them being the story right now. Pitt football, transfer portal slowed down, so now that things are changing up there. Let's talk about Pitt hoops in this one. And Pitt basketball with a promising start, 12-2 is now 12-6, and now they're 3-4 in the conference. The Panthers need to get out of this slump they're in. They do have a week off to kind of lick their wounds and get back on it. We will be in Syracuse for their game against the Orange on this upcoming Saturday. But I think the big thing that everyone's looking at here is, can this team be a tournament team? And that's our first question here that comes from Brian. How many of Pitt's remaining 13 regular season games must they win to be an NCAA tournament team? And of course, there's the ACC tournament as well. But Stephen, last year they were 12-8 in the conference, 22-11 overall. Once the ACC tournament got done, they added 1 win and 1 loss, and it wasn't enough. What do you see when you look at the rest of their schedule as far as the path to getting back to the tournament?
Yeah, well, I think it's actually helpful that Pitt went, 22-11 last year and ended up being one of the first 4 out teams. So that gives you a pretty good benchmark for what neighborhood this team needs to be in to have a shot at the NCAA tournament. Even if you end up being, one of those first 4 teams and going back to Dayton again. The interesting thing is that, not only did Pitt, when Pitt got left out last year, there were really 2 big issues, 2 big things that kept him out. First was a really high number of bid stealers, like abnormally high. But then you also had a pretty poor non-conference schedule, or strength of schedule, I should say, on Pitt's end. It's been said over and over, but, West Virginia and Missouri not quite being what everyone expected did kind of, hurt Pitt in a big way. So that's not really a problem this year. Pitt's strength of schedule in the non-conference is not only really good, but they've also got some pretty nice wins. I mean, that West Virginia win improves, just about every week. It looks better and better. I mean, especially after they knocked off Iowa State on the at home this past weekend. But LSU and SEC team certainly boosts that as well. And then beating Ohio State, even though the Buckeyes are in a little bit of a slide, they're still kind of holding pretty strong in the net as well. So I look at these final 13 games. I look at a 12-6 Pitt team right now, and I think they might only need to win 9 more conference games going into that regular season, going into the ACC tournament, I think if you get back to 22-11 overall as your record, you should feel really good. And even if that includes, a win or 2 in the ACC tournament, if you get back to the same record that you had last year with this non-conference strength of schedule and some of those better wins, I think Pitt can feel really confident about getting into the field. You might just barely get in as one of those first 4 teams, like I said, but I don't think Pitt needs to do anything particularly out of the ordinary. They don't need to go undefeated or anything like that down the stretch in order to find themselves back in the NCAA tournament.
No, I agree. I think that this is Pitt's at a much better spot than they were last year, even though they're in the same spot. They're 3-4 in the conference through their first 7 conference games. And granted, they got there differently, losing 4 straight here. And look, it's disappointing. No one's trying to minimize that part of this. But like when you look at where Pitt stands in a lot of things, like their non-conference strength of schedule right now, I believe ranks 43rd in the country. It was like in like the 300s. It was like literally in the bottom of the NCAA last year. And again, part of that was the scheduling strategy that Jeff Capel and his team put together. They wanted to give Pitt some easier non-conference wins early in the season and not play some tougher opponents there, because they wanted to give their freshman guards time to grow, and they did. But it ended up being a factor that counted against them on Selection Sunday. Now that's not the case right now, but you still need to get there. And so with looking at this question from Brian, I then go to say, okay, where can Pitt make the difference down the stretch here? And so we go over their last 13 games, and I agree, 9-13 games is the pace that you need to get there. But when we look at the games that they're playing, a lot of these teams are beneath Pitt in the ACC standings. Right now. You have 2 games against Syracuse, including the one we're covering on the road. Those both need to be wins. You have a game against Miami. Miami's terrible right now, and you got them at home. That has to be a win. Virginia has been playing terrible. That has to be a win. You look at Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, NC State, Boston College. I think all of those games have to be a win. So if you get that, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, NC State, Boston College, 2 against Syracuse, 1 against Miami. That's 7 wins right there that you tally if you can beat the teams that are beneath you in the ACC standings. So then by that's 7 out of 13. 6, you need to win 2 out of the 6 other games that are against comparable ACC talent or ACC teams or teams that are playing really well right now. North Carolina, you get a home and home. You get them at the Pitt. That's going to be a big game. If Pitt can beat Syracuse and get off the schneid Saturday night, a quick turnaround to play North Carolina at home that next Tuesday for a 9 p.m. tip-off. That could be a really huge game. You win that game, that can buy you some space. Wake Forest, that's a tough game. Wake Forest is playing well right now. Pitt and Wake Forest go back and forth a lot in their time with Jeff Capel, but that's a noon game on a Saturday. That's going to be one to see. SMU on the road in February. That's going to be a tough one. SMU's been playing really well. And then you get your rematch with Louisville in Louisville after they beat you at home. So I look at those opportunities, and I think there is a path there. Like, again, these are very beatable teams. Pitt has to get back to playing the basketball that got it here in the first place and also grow in how they're getting better. So I don't think that this is some insurmountable thing. And I know people are probably thinking like, well, if they just get back to that same record, it won't make a difference. It will make a difference because they already have in the teams that they've beaten, the way that they played early, and the non-conference team that they played. I think the biggest thing, even if they got back to 22 wins, they cannot have one of those losses be like a Miami or be like a Boston College. If they lose 4 games, if they go 9-4 down the stretch, they will be in the tournament. My opinion, as long as their losses are like SMU. Not Virginia, Wake Forest, and like Louisville, and then like at North Carolina. Like you lose those games, I think that that's not going to hurt you too much. But what hurt them last year too was they lost to Missouri, which was a terrible loss at home. I think that was a quad 4 loss if I remember correctly. That kind of stuff will sink you. So there's a path there, but Pitt got to start hitting on it this Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like Pitt's saving grace during this 4-game losing streak is that 3 of the losses have been quad 1 losses. And the one quad 2 loss that they took against Clemson was just kind of barely a quad 2 loss, pretty much only because it was a home game for them. So, who knows, that could become a quad 1 win when it's all said and done. But I completely agree with you that Pitt's got to avoid bad losses and maybe steal one really good win against, a North Carolina, a Wake Forest, an SMU, or a Louisville, and then you're feeling pretty good. So, not a disaster yet. It feels pretty disastrous right now, but Pitt has every opportunity in the world to pull out of this, and they will have every opportunity in front of them to rebuild their resume and get back into contention for the NCAA tournament.
Absolutely. Gary emailed this question in: should Papa Kante have a bigger role on this team over either of the Diaz-Graham twins? Steven, I think if you asked this question even like a few weeks ago, it might have been a little bit louder. But I personally think when you look at both Jorge and Guillermo, I think they're both playing a lot better of late. Jorge's been fantastic shooting-wise. We'll talk about him in a bit. But Guillermo's been pretty solid. Neither of them have, I think, the confidence issues or the strength of the ball issues that they've had more pronouncedly in the last couple seasons where, when they got the ball, it was really easy to knock them over. They're playing better right now. And that's not to knock on Papa. I do think it would be nice to get Papa Kante involved. But I think that's the thing here is that Pitt has to pick and choose what their strengths are right now. And the Diaz-Graham twins offer a very unique skill set that can help them do a few other things.
Yeah, I agree with you. The thing, Guillermo has kind of freed himself from the shooting slump that he was in for a good part of this year. He's really cut down on the turnovers. He's been one of the more effective rebounders on the team, but he's been playing some limited minutes. Honestly, recently he did play 34 against Clemson, but, in the 3 games prior to that, he didn't play more than 12 minutes. There's been a little bit of foul trouble every once in a while, but sometimes he's just not exactly fitting the matchup. I do feel like, honestly, there's more room for both of the twins. I feel like they need some more of both of these guys, which we're going to, again, talk about in a little bit. But I think Kante can be good in spots, but I'm just not sure if he really gives them what they need at this point in the year. I don't think what he brings is, first of all, different enough, but also, just offensively, his skill set, I don't think really fits into what Pitt needs right now, which is a little bit more shooting, a little bit more ability to create shots and knock down shots from the outside, to free up things for Jaland Lowe and Ishmael Leggett. Those guys really need to be playmakers, but you need guys who can make plays off of them. And I just don't think that at this point in his career, Kante is really able to do that for them. Not really a comment on him necessarily as a player, especially considering how young he is, but I'm just not sure that his skill set at this point in time is what Pitt needs the most. Honestly, I would kind of flip it on its head, and I would say the Diaz-Graham twins really should be playing a lot more minutes, both of them.
I think their ability to shoot the ball, and now it seems to be like Jorge is shooting well. In fact, let's jump right to Dave's question. Who questioned Jorge is clearly their most efficient 3-point shooter, and in one game after leading the team in scoring, he plays just 4 minutes. Of course, talking about that loss to Clemson there. How can you explain that? And Stephen, I think that Jeff Capel talks about putting his best guys on the floor. Jorge being a shooter when you need to get offense going seems like it's a reasonable answer. Do you see an obvious reason for why he's not involved in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, so Clemson, I think it's more easy to explain away, just because his brother was playing alongside, I believe it was Leggett, Lowe, Austin, and Dunn during that big run, those big runs that they had in the second half that really got them back into the game and eventually took the lead. So Capel, I think, was just sticking with the guys who were working and the guys who were going on that run. That said, I mean, it's a team who, and excuse me, I'm pulling up the stats from that game, but it's a team that shot, 5 of 17 from 3 in the first half, and then 5 of 14 from 3 in the second half. There was clearly an opportunity or a need for more shooters and more offense in the lineup earlier in the game. So I think that does give me some pause, and that does make me wonder, where was Jorge in that game? Because he was such a great spark for them down at Florida State when the shots weren't really falling and when they were kind of struggling offensively. The only other explanation I can maybe say is that, Jorge's not necessarily a great rebounder, statistically, or even if you look at some of the advanced metrics, he doesn't stand out in that sense. Not a particularly great defender in my mind either. I know he had a really nice block during one sequence down at Florida State, but I think what Pitt really maybe felt they needed, especially early in that game against Clemson, was to hold their own on the boards, especially after what happened, down at Florida State and then in that Louisville game and against Duke as well. That's a spot where you would maybe want Cam Corrin or Guillermo on the floor a little bit more, or even Zack, Austin, or Damian Dunn, who are all better rebounders for their positions compared to Jorge. That's really the only other explanation that I could come up with, but I do kind of agree with the overarching sentiment that Jorge does deserve some more minutes, and they should try to draw up some more shots for him, because I think he can really be effective playing off of those 2 lead guards that Pitt's got.
Yeah, that's where I look at it. Like, listen, I think that there's reasonable concerns for finding the healthy rotation where guys can get on the floor. I think Jeff Capel, he likes to put his best guys out there when they're feeling it and let them cook. But I also think that there could be a healthy pace of when you're trying to get certain things to play a certain way for a certain period of time. And Jorge being a really good shooter can just spark things up, I think, with this team, especially with the way that it wants to stretch the floor and force you to honor things. I think part of it also just Pitt needs its guards to recognize that those opportunities when they're there with the guys that are on the floor. Zack Austin's been a good 3-point shooter for most of the season. Guillermo's been picking it up of late. So it might not be just getting Jorge on the floor. I think that there's a lot of different talent. Like, I think this Pitt team, again, has talent across the board. They just have to get it in the right moments. And Jeff Capel talked on the Monday Zoom about, needing to play consistent defense for 40 minutes and not just for 20 minutes, which is one thing that Pitt needs to be better at. So certainly Jorge, I think, not playing, there's different reasons for that. But I do think that down the stretch, as we continue on the season, there's going to need to be games where he's more involved in if the offense is struggling. I think less hesitation to try to wait to see if they figure it out. Get guys. This isn't back in when it was Jamarius Burton, or bust and you needed that guy to be on, or Blake Hinson or bust. And if one of those guys weren't on, you were just toast. You have other options. I think that Jeff Capel could do better to allow that to manifest a little bit more, to trust his guys a little bit more and say, hey, Zack's a little off right now. Let's give him like a 4-minute break. Jorge, get in there and see if his 3-point shooting wakes you up. And if not, then you keep a rotation going. But certainly that's part of the challenges with coaching. A lot of people pretend it's as simple as just push the button and everything will work. Sometimes you push the button that everyone thinks is going to work and it doesn't. But that's part of where Pitt has to get some answers. And let's talk about that rotation. Our last question here comes from X. We're at H-Town Pitt. It asks, if Pitt doesn't have a big that will command the paint, why don't they go to a pure shooting lineup? Lowe, Leggett, Austin, Twins, and Corin could at least give you the length and the shooting. Corin, I feel like, has developed into a solid big in the paint. I mean, he's not, Ontario Let. He's not DeJuan Blair, but like he's good. He's a guy that's shown that he can score. I mean, in I think 5 of his last 7 games, he scored in the double digits. And certainly, like, Jeff even talked about, they switched Guillermo to the 5 so that he could just kind of, they could really stretch the floor with the shooters, and that was a big part of their comeback. But I think that well, this team needs to be able to shoot well to win games. I also think that there's this is part of the plan, as already right now. That's what Corin does play. I mean, those guys play a lot. Like I think that's part of the plan. Maybe Jorge needs to play more, but I have a hard time taking Cam Corin off the floor. I think if anything, Steven, maybe the guards need to be able to. Maybe there needs to be more ways to engineer the guards to get better opportunities for Cam Corin in this offense.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I feel like I'm kind of standing out here alone on Cam Corin Island. Like, I think he's been really good this year. I don't know. He has been. He's shooting like above 63%, I'm pretty sure, on 2-point shots. He's super efficient around the rim. And I don't know. You can ask him to rebound better. I think that's perfectly fair. But I think he's been a really solid interior defender as well. I don't know. I like the way that Cam Corin's been playing. I'm with you. Like, they were a couple times, especially in that Clemson game down the stretch, where I thought he could have provided them a bit of a change-up offensively that would have, again, opened some things up and taken some pressure off Jaland Lowe and Leggett, who Jeff Capel said today, sometimes they press a little bit, when they're down. And sometimes they feel like they need to be the ones to make the plays when they are really, really effective as playmakers. And some of their best moments this year have come when they have trusted their teammates to make plays for them. And, in turn, that opens things up for them. So that's all to say, I think Cam Corin's been playing really well. I think that command the paint, that phrase is interesting. I think Corin's been really good, especially on the interior. But I also would point out that, like we mentioned earlier, I mean, the lineup that got Pitt back into the game against Clemson was Lowe, Leggett, Austin, Damian Dunn, who's been a really effective 3-point shooter this year, and Guillermo. Jeff Capel has used that lineup a bunch. I think there are moments where, like you said, we thought, Cam Corin went 7 of 7 or 7 for 7 from the field or something in that Clemson game and didn't take many shots down the stretch. When they were struggling offensively, why was he not more involved? Maybe.
Right.
But part of the reason was that Jeff Capel had this lineup in there with Guillermo at the 5 that could stretch the 4 a little bit more and, space things out for Pitt's guards to make some more plays. So, they are using this lineup that you want, maybe not using it as much as you would like, but, it was a massive part of their comeback against Clemson and the reason that they were able to force overtime in that game at all.
Absolutely. I do think that that's part of the plan that needs to be here at Pitt is to keep up the rotations and maybe to find some of these switches a little bit earlier. They are using most of these players. I think that the one thing is that maybe they could use a little bit more Jorge in those mix-ups, but that's got to be some of the buttons that Jeff Capel pushes down the stretch here. Again, sorry, you about to say something, Steven?
Oh no, yeah, go finish your point. I just want to add one more thing when you're done.
Well, I was just gonna say this is gonna be a really big stretch this year. I think this is a tournament capable team. I know that people are down because they've lost 4 straight, but the possibility is there. I think they have to start hitting on their strengths again to get back to that point.
Yeah, and I was just gonna add that I think ever since Damian Dunn came back, clearly there's just, I wouldn't call it logjam, but I think they're just kind of rediscovering what the lineups that fit together best are, because you've got a couple different things going on. You've got, you've got Dunn coming back, and then you had Leggett out for a game and then back in. You've got Jorge, who is, Jeff Capel told us at one point was kind of getting healthier, from that preseason injury, still kind of finding his legs underneath him. So I think you've got a convergence of a couple different things that makes figuring out just exactly which of these lineups are most effective a little bit tougher. And so to me, over the past few games, when you look at them on the whole, it's clear that Pitt still has some figuring out to do. And that might be the biggest reason why they've slid into this 4-game losing streak and, need to kind of hit gut check time and really come up with a win really badly on Saturday against Syracuse.
Absolutely. We will have that coverage for you here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter and Stephen Thompson. Thanks again to everyone who sent in their questions via email, Twitter, or however you send your questions. Remember to send those questions in. We always record this show Monday evening-ish going into Tuesday. So try to get your questions in over the weekend. If you got any questions after this next Pitt game, let us know. And remember, there's also a Tuesday night game against North Carolina next week. So lots of action coming your way here. We'll keep it here with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the Pitt Mailbag Show, as well as all of our content here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. See you here soon from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Stephen Thompson. Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.